All right, so let's get started. Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Community Outreach Strategy Workshop. I am Bridget Legault, and I'm a project manager with Village Wellth in collaboration with the ACCA. And together we're providing resources to accelerate investment co-op activity within Alberta and BC. Many of you here I've met, and some are new. I also have my colleagues from Village Wellth here who can either give a wave or a hi in the chat, specifically Annette, who's here to help with anything kind of tech related and to provide some resources and whatnot in the chat. You can DM her if you need anything. So I'd like to make mention today on National Indigenous Peoples Day that I come to you from the unceded territory of the Squamish Nation. And I'd ask that if you're familiar with the traditional lands that you live upon, to share that in the chat. A little bit about myself. I have experience in various industries, more recently in community consulting and management consulting, coming today again as the project manager working with ACCA and Village Wellth. Full disclaimer, I am not a cooperative expert, but there are many co-op experts in the room, and so we'll be leaning heavily on Seth and Zoe and Michelle and others to share their insights today with us in the chat from that kind of core co-op perspective or lens. I do have some experience in the business acquisition space, and that is the space that Village Wellth works within. Village Wellth offers a platform and resources for folks looking to acquire businesses. So Annette is going to put our website in the chat. If you have any questions, we can follow up with you on that afterwards. We'll also throw the ACCA and the BCCA's details in there too, so you can connect with those organizations if you haven't already. So we'll just go to the next slide, Annette. I'm going to ask everybody to get active in the chat, be engaged, share who you are, where you're from, if you haven't already shared that in your land acknowledgement, and also what is your involvement with investment co-ops, so we can get a bit of a feel for who's in the room. And while we do that, I'll just cover a quick few housekeeping items. So last night at about 6 Mountain Time, we sent you a workbook, and you'll want to have that workbook on the ready, either printed or just on your screen, and Annette can throw a copy of it in the chat if you weren't able to access it through Google Drive last night. Again, we want this to be interactive, so please actively take part in the chat. I'll try to catch any action happening there. And we are recording, so if you don't want to be recorded, please turn your camera off. But otherwise, I encourage you to turn it on so we can interact and see each other's reactions. So we've got, who do we got? We've got a few folks coming from Village Wellth. We have Michelle from BCCA. Thanks for coming. And Seth and Zoe, of course. And anyone else would like to share their involvement with investment co-ops, we'd love to know where you're coming from in the chat there. In the interest of time, we'll move right ahead though. So we'll hit the slide, Annette. Thank you very much. This is going to be our agenda for today. We're going to talk about overarching community outreach strategy. We're going to dig into various audiences that we can reach out to, create a value proposition for these audiences, which will then trickle into key messaging tactics and some kind of tips and tricks on how to deliver a really great pitch. We'll see what time permits as we move through this agenda. We'll go to the next slide and get right into it. Oh, Mark from Innovate Cochrane, nice to see you. I heard you had a great event earlier this week. That's cool. Alrighty, so we're gonna just start talking about strategy right off the bat. So we always need, and I'm sure you all know from building community relationships, that building community trust takes considerable amount of time. And something that we can do really intentionally through building a community strategy is intentionally planning for some consistent outreach, and that too will help build the trust that we have within our community. So we want to keep these three elements of trust, time, and consistency in the back of our minds as we work through our community outreach strategy. So we'll go to the next slide, Matt. Awesome. Catherine's here from Egmont. Great to see you. And Jody from Bow Valley Green Energy. Thanks for coming, Jody. Awesome. So Whenever we are designing any strategy, we want to start with that broader vision and mission, as I'm sure many of you are familiar with if you've done any strategic work. Your vision is kind of that moonshot, that North Star that's future facing and what we're shooting towards. And that mission is kind of that statement of who you are. We're not going to be discussing these today. We just simply don't have time. We'll make the assumption that anyone with investment cooperatives here today have established these mission and vision statements and or values, and I'm sure are all operating from the 7 cooperative principles as well. But if you do need any help or guidance in developing your vision or mission statement, we have tons of resources on how you can walk through that with your leadership team. So we're happy to provide that those resources after the workshop. We'll be providing tools today for each of these lower levels of the pyramid. So your goals and objectives for your outreach strategy, your key messages, and then really intentional tactics that you can take out to the community. And we'll just kind of put out this disclaimer out front. If you're looking at your workbook, we won't have time to fully develop each of the sections in the workbook. And it's really something you'll want to take back to your community groups or your investment co-ops and do as a group. But this will give you the framework for those discussions with your group and a bit of a head start with some of the key pieces. So we're also really happy and excited to meet with you after this workshop to dig in deeper with your teams if you'd like some help and guidance in really developing the full workbook outside of today. So let's head over to the next slide. Here we thought we would present the 6 stages of forming an investment co-op, and these are taken excuse me, directly from the BC Community Investment Cooperative Startup and Operations Guide, which is a mouthful. But if you're not familiar with this document, it is in the resource folder that we provided with you yesterday. And this great infographic with more detail is on page 13. And we have found it very useful as we drink from the investment co-op fire hose, learning all things in developing co-ops. But we thought it'd also be really interesting to have a look at these stages today so that we can set the stage for groups to start thinking about where and when they will be conducting community outreach activities. So if you're in the formation stage of creating your investment co-op, you might be identifying some other core champions or leaders in your community. So you might be having some outreach activities occur there. As you move through the process, you might be reaching out to your broader community for membership, for investment, maybe to the entrepreneurial community to find projects to invest in. So if you wouldn't mind just sharing in the chat, welcome Tim and Aniki, I don't know how to pronounce that. But if you wouldn't mind all sharing in the chat, at which stage of this process are you in? And where do you see community outreach being, or which audiences, I guess, or which types of community outreach do you think you'll be initially looking at conducting? And if you do contribute that to the chat, it might help with some of the conversation as we move forward. Mark's in the formation stage. That's exciting. And Cochrane, we'll have to talk to you about that afterwards. So you can keep populating that in the chat. And if we can head over to the next slide, as people are thinking about those various stages and audience, we'll head right back into this pyramid. And here you can look operations, seeking investments, so looking for deal flow on Jody's side, which is great. Operations as well, that's exciting. Okay, there's quite a few groups in that kind of sustainability operation side, so really interesting. I'd love to meet with you after this because we haven't all spoken one-on-one. But we do want to now think about those stages and those audiences. And we can go back to the workbook. We've created a bit of a matrix there for you to start setting some overarching goals and perhaps some one to kind of 3 objectives that will lead into each of your outreach goals. Again, we won't have time to develop this fully, and you'll want to do this with your leadership groups. But we would like you to take a moment in that workbook and think about some overarching goals that you want to achieve. And we have put an example in there. I think it's around increasing deal flow, which seems relevant to a few of your groups here today. But whatever that overarching goal might be for you is what you'll want to include in that goal piece. And then on the objective side, and again, we might not get to the nitty-gritty today, but eventually you'll want to be able to articulate some really specific objectives so that you can keep your groups aligned when conducting this outreach. And I'm sure everybody, if most, have heard of the SMART acronym. So when we get to this objective piece, this is where we want to get super specific, have some metrics around these objectives so we can measure our progress, make sure they're both achievable and relevant within the time span that you set for your groups. So just a reminder on how to set some really clear and specific goals. And these obviously will lead into that mission and vision of your investment co-ops, and it will guide all of that work, nitty-gritty, more tactical work that we'll look at below. So I'll give everybody just a minute of awkward silence to think through a goal or two that you might want to put in your workbook and use as kind of a path forward for the rest of the hour today. And if you're bold enough, share that draft goal in the chat as well. This is where we should have cued some music. All right, we'll go to the next slide. We don't have a lot of time, and I'd love to give everybody more time to share. Turns out we don't have the breakout function in this Zoom room, which we were hoping we would have had, and we could have shared with each other. But we're a pretty small group, so we'll do that in just a moment in one of the upcoming activities. So again, we're providing you with these tools. You'll take them back to your group. Once your goals and these objectives are set, we want to start looking at who is in our community. And we probably have a lot of assumptions around who already exists in our community and who might, want to be involved in our investment co-op in various ways. However, these are just assumptions and we need to validate them. So there are various tools that we can use to validate these types of assumptions of who is in our community. And we want to be able to really and truly understand these folks. So we need to understand, are they as passionate about our cause as we are? Are they willing to give up their time or money? Where do these people spend their time and money currently? And all sorts of other aspects about these various folks in our community. So we call these profiles that we can build community personas. And so a persona is a summary of this kind of overlook of an average member in our community. We can create a persona for certain circumstances. So maybe you have an investor persona, maybe you have an entrepreneur persona, maybe there's just a cooperative member persona. It's up to your group how many you want to create and how you want to create them. And many of you may have done this type of exercise before, but we really want to gain that true understanding around their demographics, their goals, their frustrations, and then how we can intentionally communicate with these folks throughout their various stages of awareness of our investment co-op. So we'll go to the next slide. We were really excited to learn that the SABRE Cooperative, which is the Southern Alberta Renewables Energy Cooperative, has already created these personas. And so Seth shared those with me, and that was exciting to see. And we've kind of riffed off of SABRE's template in your workbook. They've provided a few samples, and they're in the resources folder here. And so here's a great example of a persona that SABRE has created. This is our new friend, Ben Landsberg. Ben is an oil and gas worker, I think in the Calgary area. He's 40 years old, married, he's got 3 kids, and he's starting to feel a little bit frustrated about his role in the oil and gas sector and some instability in his job in that sector. And he's hoping he can start taking part more actively in the renewable energy scene. And so you can see here how SABRE has developed this persona. And through your workbook, you can start to do the same. A great place to start with this type of work is to maybe choose somebody in your community. Don't tell them maybe that you use them as an example, but that might be a good starting point if you already know someone, if you're building an investor persona and you know someone who's going to be a great contributor to the fund, then maybe start building your persona around them as an example. And then as you get to know community members through your outreach, you'll continue to iterate and build on these personas so you can get really deep into understanding who they are and what motivates them. And we'll talk about why that's important as we move to the next slide. So Sabre has continued on kind of this strategic thinking path by developing some journey maps for their personas, which is excellent to see. So we can see that Sabre's kind of walked through the various stages of how Ben would experience community outreach with their investment co-op. And so at the top kind of level there, Ben would need to be made aware that, well, the co-op even exists. They have some questions here like, what does Sabre do? I would argue that Ben's probably still wondering what the heck Sabre is. So knowing that Ben has these questions about renewables and how he can get more involved in renewables, etc., we can start to figure out what touch points we can conduct our outreach with Ben that will meet him where he is at. And that is the key, I think, in community outreach, is being able to meet people where they are at. And there's a whole lot of education to do in the investment cooperative scene. So we're learning. And so community members generally need to have this kind of live through this stage of awareness. And then in order to be able to move through to considering to taking part in your cooperative, and then maybe even converting to being an investor or a board member or whatever role they might be looking to take on. And then, as many of you have articulated today, you might be looking to see how you can keep that engagement and retention flowing with the individual community members in your groups. So again, without having the time to really individually develop the personas, it's tough to jump right to this journey stage. So again, we will take a few minutes to think about these personas as a starting point and who they might be in your community. And maybe because we can't do the breakout rooms, we'll just ask here if anybody has any questions at this stage. Many of you might be familiar with this type of working tools. Don't be shy, just unmute and ask if you have a question. Okay, no problem there. I will just add at this point, if you're a group, I know we've spoken to some groups that have to move quite quickly at the stage they're at, potentially those 6 stages that we touched on at the beginning of how creating an investment co-op. Perhaps you had to jump over a couple of those stages because an opportunity was in front of you and you've now formed your cooperative and you're moving fast and furiously towards a deadline for raising your first leg of capital or whatever it might look like for you. That doesn't mean to skip over these steps. And I know from working with a lot of entrepreneurs, a little bit different, but very relatable. A lot of folks do not want to take the time to dig into this type of research and develop these profiles. And they end up missing the mark. There's a statistic that like 95% of startups fail, and the majority of them fail because they didn't take the time to understand their audience. And so it becomes really important to move that engagement and that commitment along even faster when you're at a point in your cooperative where you need to move the engagement along faster, that you meet them where they are at and not try to just kind of force ideas or opportunities in front of them where they're maybe not able to get there because they simply don't have a full understanding or education. And so really important to move through these stages, and you can do it quickly if you have to. And there's ways you can, but that you do intentionally observe kind of where your community members are at each of these stages overall, or broken out into personas like this is even more effective. Okay, so we'll move ahead. So now as you're working through this process, you start to understand your audience a little bit better. You'll now want to be able to understand what value do you offer to these community members, because they're probably thinking, whether we like it or not, what's in it for them or what's in it for their broader community. And so you can think of a value proposition as a statement that defines, and I'm saying statement like a sentence or two max, that defines the value that you will deliver to your community members. And this is really important, again, to define, because it becomes a really powerful tool to gain buy-in and engagement on whatever goal that you're trying to achieve with your outreach. And so you can think of the value proposition as the solution, to your community's problems or community individual members' problems, the impact that it will create to the potential frustrations that are occurring in the community and the gains to their pains. So this is really an exercise in just articulating that sweet spot, that kind of explosion in the middle of the value you can provide to them, and will help to convert community members faster into actively participating. And so we're going to look at an example here, and then we're going to start talking a bit as a group about what the value each of our cooperatives bring to our individual communities. So we'll go to the next slide. I reached out to our friends at Local Investing YYC. Barb Davies is an old colleague and friend of mine, and the director, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Seth, and Seth is also really involved with Local Investing YYC. They're really great at their overall outreach, and they're great at kind of their overall strategy, really. And so I asked Barb, what is your value proposition statement at Local Investing YYC? And she said, well, we haven't really nailed it, but here's kind of a sample of where I think it's at. And so this is, again, a working draft, a great example of a working draft of a value proposition. They take time to develop. I kind of pulled apart some of the pieces she gave me, and I've split it into various, those personas that we spoke about. So for a more kind of general community member type of persona, Local Investing YYC makes local investing accessible to Albertans. The key there really being the accessibility of investing. I don't think you have to be an accredited investor with Local Investing YYC, right, Seth? So this is really appealing to that persona who might really identify with the values of Local Investing YYC. And then the second value proposition statement that's geared towards maybe the entrepreneurial community is that the investment co-op provides patient capital to entrepreneurs, which sounds valuable. I guess the only maybe area for improvement there might be to use simpler language, where patient capital could be perceived differently by different audiences. And so we could get a little clearer as to what patient means, but we get the gist that they're a new innovative source of financing for entrepreneurs, for local entrepreneurs who might not have access to a lot of traditional financing. So I'm going to open the floor here. We were going to head into some breakouts and talk about this in smaller groups so we can start to brainstorm value propositions for each of your investment co-ops. But we don't have the breakout room. So I'll ask if anyone would like to unmute and share what value they feel their investment co-op brings to their particular community.
I'm not part of an investment co-op at the moment, but maybe I'll vamp for a minute so people can have some time to come up with an idea. But I'm really glad you used the Local Investing YYC as a case study. I think they've articulated it really well. If you follow them on LinkedIn, I find something really interesting is that they show a lot of updates around what they do as an investment co-op, as well as the businesses that they're investing in. I think that paints that other part of the picture. But if they've articulated the value proposition that then provides the entryway into that. So I find like this was such a good hook to say, this is what we do and this is what we're about. But once they're in the conversation, following them on LinkedIn or through their other channels, they're able to reinforce that more in the doing. And I find it's really interesting to see, oh, we're talking to this business, or we did an investment in this one, and that really reinforces the message going there. So the value proposition, I think, can be tricky. It's hard to get it down to a sentence and make it clear enough that someone can just pick up out of the blue and get on board. But once you have that, then you can really backload it or support it with all the examples of all the work that you do. So I think they do a great example of this. Bow Valley Green Energy Co-op, I know Jody's on the line here, and some of the others as well. So it's definitely that gateway into it. And if you're not following Local Investing YYC on LinkedIn, I definitely check them out. It's a great example of some of the tools that are readily available to move this forward.
Awesome. Yeah, they do a great job. Nice looking branding as well, which is appealing. Who do we have here? the VP of WKBC-IVC, we bridge the gap between investors and local businesses.
Sorry, I added an extra thing to an already complex acronym. I see Tyler Rice is on the call, but he's driving, so probably can't type at the same time. But okay. The West Kootenay Boundary Community Investment Co-op has a nice succinct statement that is kind of galvanizing. It's why I'm a member.
Well, that's really cool that you added that last part, Zoe. And I like how it's dual facing. Like I can very clearly see the value as an investor and as a local business. And I think for many of the groups you're looking for deal flow and looking for investment projects might be an interesting exercise to think about your value proposition for, you know, those who would approach you for projects, whereas rather than just looking at this from our, you know, investors, attracting investors. Does anybody else want to share before we move along? Okay, we'll move on. So kind of what Seth was speaking to around like building credibility through and Barb Davies from local, she mentioned that to me too, Seth, around like her annual, is it your annual or quarterly impact report, which really starts to build that credibility. I think that's really important, and it might and will be important when you're delivering different key messages at different times in your outreach. So now kind of, you know, as you work through this workbook and this kind of framework, you have your vision and mission, you have these goals and objectives, you know your audience really well. You can, the point of that exercise of getting to know your audiences in your community really well is to be able to deliver key messaging that actually meets them where they are at and really resonates with them, such as that really simple value prop that Zoe threw in there. So we can think about key messaging as a great way to effectively inform. So again, always meeting your audience where they're at. So if you need to inform them or educate them around certain elements of your investment opportunity, perhaps it's TFSA eligible, RSP eligible, that seems to be a real benefit to communities and investors who are not accredited investors. Maybe you want to educate the entrepreneurs in your community of this opportunity that they have to seek financing from your group. Possibly you're driving awareness. Maybe it's a membership drive, or just, again, start trying to create more awareness around what investment cooperatives are. Or you might even be, and more succinctly, trying to convert people, whether it be to be board members, to take part in your core champion leadership team, or invest, or whatever it might look like from a conversion perspective. And you might also be using key messages to help maintain that involvement and that buy-in from your current members, your volunteers, and keep that engagement going. So you can think of your communication strategy as encompassing various elements of these 5 pieces, and you're going to break them down and use them differently at different points in time. This is also, we'll go to the next slide, Annette, but I'll just mention that this is, again, a really iterative process. You can plan and plan and plan, but you'll continuously get feedback from your community members, and you'll want to continuously evolve your messages to get more and more succinct and clear as you go. So here are some really quick key messaging tips. So you can use key messaging to align your team. So you want to make sure everybody is going out to the community and singing from the same songbook, you know, reading from the same page, whatever thing you want to use. You want to make sure everybody's coming from a united voice. So in that same sense, you can develop a lot of efficiencies within your team, especially if you are looking at deadlines and you need to get out there and get these messages out quite quickly. It's a great exercise to take the time and develop maybe 3 to 5 key messages, or maybe like 1 to 2, 1 to 3-ish for each of your individual audiences. You know, write these with your leadership team, make them succinct, make them concise, and put them in boilerplates, whether they're maybe a 50-word version, a 100-word version, a 250-word version, and keep them in a place where everybody can easily access them and take them out to the community. And what else do we have here? We have around focusing on those persona attributes. We didn't, you didn't do all the research around the personas for no reason. So ensure that you're really driving home to those pains and frustrations that your community members are feeling when you're developing these key messages, and that you're always telling kind of that purpose that you bring to the community and really leveraging storytelling. So you hear about storytelling in the marketing world a lot lately, and that's because that's really how we relate best. If someone tells you a story, you can always find your own way to relate to that story. And so the co-ops that we've met here in the last few months have the most incredible stories, of their groups essentially saving really keystones and key businesses in their communities and keeping their communities thriving. And so really pull on those heartstrings and leverage those great stories that you all have to tell. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, is to lose all of the jargon. Let go of the acronyms, let go of the complicated language. A lot of marketing research and sales kind of research indicate that when you're pitching an idea to someone, you should be speaking at a grade 5 or 6 level. And that even goes for when you're pitching to investors. So they will relate easier, they will convert faster, they will gain a better understanding more quickly if you really take that language down to its most simplistic form. So as you're creating these key messages and hopefully kind of, putting them in some folders in an organized fashion that everybody on your team can use and stay aligned with, you can continue to edit them and ensure that you're really using simple language, you're hitting the pains and gains of your personas, and you're really driving that value proposition home. So again, we were gonna chat more about this in small groups, but if we want to maybe open the floor for any questions or any comments of what has worked for your investment co-ops, that's what I'd really like to hear more about from everyone here today. What has worked for your groups in delivering these types of messages to your community?
Well, if Keith from Peace Energy Co-op in Dawson Creek can butt in with a comment. We're just at a point where we're planning how to go and engage with the community to perhaps raise some funds. But maybe this has been mentioned already. I think all co-ops, not just investment quotation mark co-ops, need to be aware of how to engage with the community to forward their goals. So this whole presentation is very useful to a broader audience than just what you're speaking to. Coming from a teaching background, this using grade 5 level language and keeping it simple and losing the jargon all sounds spot on. So just well done, and we're listening with both ears.
Thank you, Keith. That's great. Do you have any insights to share on what has worked for you in the past or not worked that could add to this?
Well, as I say, we're just getting to a point where we maybe we're starting to engage with our community. So we're at a learning position, not a sharing position yet.
Yeah, fair enough. That's great. And the way, again, had we had more time, had this been like a half-day workshop and you had your leadership teams here and we could work through the workbook together, again, we'd love to do that with you outside of this hour and really dig into the pieces. And as you then assemble each of these frameworks for your own group, and document them and practice, we'll get into kind of more of the pitch side of things and how to deliver these messages. But it's definitely something that takes time, but assembling all of these tools in a drive or whatever that looks like for your group, so that it's very easy to head out and do that outreach. But it all comes back to those goals and that broader mission of your group as well. Any other comments or questions or insights into your own outreach practices before we keep going? Don't be shy. Okay, we'll head to the next slide. So now we're kind of getting down to the bottom of that pyramid, and how do we actually go out to our community? We now know that we know who's there. We know who might have the most interest. We've created these personas of these ideal kind of profiles of folks we want to reach out to. We know the value we want to bring to them. We have some key messages prepared. What do we do and how do we do it? I think we've all partaken in these types of activities before, so we certainly don't need to go through them. But I think the most important thing to identify here is, again, that you're meeting your audience where they're at. I've heard from some co-op folks in this space that say, it's all about coffee dates. You have to go one-on-one. You have to go one-on-one. And I think that's certainly the case for many individuals. However, we do live in a very different world than we did 2 years ago, and a low tolerance for, extra meetings and taking on extra activities, even in the evenings. I don't know about yourselves, but I do not want another meeting in the evening anymore. I just don't want that. So there are other ways we can meet folks where they are at. One example is back to the Sabre persona that Ben was our friend's name, I think. He was a hockey dad. And so he's sitting at his kids' hockey games thinking about, now we know this about him, and he's probably thinking about how frustrated he is, with his job and the way the world is going with the traditional energy sources or whatever he's thinking. There might be a way we can, have flyers at hockey games, or we can do outreach during intermission, or whatever it might look like. It could be anything under the sun, and you can get quite creative. Some groups I know, will host a booth at their community events. You might have videos recorded that you can easily send out and people can watch at their leisure, maybe explaining to them on a bit more detail, because investment co-ops are a very complex tool. And I've definitely learned that, and it is hard to articulate. So some really simple pieces of information that folks could use to wrap their head around things, whatever that might look like. And of course, here are some ideas. But to the next slide we'll go, and we'll talk a bit more about some other important pieces that you may not have thought about around how to really deliver these tactics more effectively and use your resources more effectively to do so, especially if you're under a time constraint to do so. So one great tip is to kind of assess the skill set and the networks of your individual leadership teams members. So Joe might know these networks, and Sally might know X networks, and who knows how to articulate our business case, and who might know how to do that. Come together, take an inventory of all of these assets and use them really wisely, and then divide and conquer based on those assets and those networks. Just like we set goals for the overarching strategy, you'll probably want to set some objectives, goals, call them what you will, every time you go out for even a coffee date or to do a presentation. Maybe at the coffee date, you want to ensure at the end of it, you have a call to action around getting a referral to another potential investor or another individual in the community. So it can be as small as just another referral or introduction, or it can be as big as, we want to get $10,000, $400,000 worth of investment for our deposit on the land we're buying, whatever it is. Set some goals before each tactic, and then debrief afterwards, whether it's with yourself or with your team. I went out on these coffee dates or did these webinars, and this is what worked for me, what worked for you, and then keep iterating on those tactics. It's really obviously a learn as we go sort of thing, but we can be really intentional about the lessons we learn along the way. I think that's it for this slide. So we will get into really the final section, and then we'll have a bit more time to hear from everybody and where they're at and what they might need more help with. So the pitch, this storytelling piece that you take out to your community. We're really drawing actually here on some pitch experts that come out of the innovation scene in Calgary, pulled this directly from them, and they've okayed it. But the pitch, this is really, whether you're doing a 30-second elevator pitch, we call it, that 30-second quick pitch to someone in the grocery store aisle, or if you are conducting a full-on presentation to a room full of community members, whatever that might look like. There are 5 key pieces that you'll want to touch on. A couple of them, you know, if you're in the grocery aisle, you may not get to, but the key 3 here are your why. So you'll want to be able to touch on that problem and the solution that you're offering, that community impact that you're going to be bringing to your community through this project. You'll also want to touch on the how, because that's where people's brains will go to next. Well, how are you going to do this? And I have structure and ROI here as an example. However, it really depends on the conversation. For going back to like simplistic language, you might want to bring the how piece down to, you know, how can I attend the next meeting you're hosting, the information session you're hosting or something? When and what time is it at and where do I go? Like simplistic how, or it could be more complex, like the structure of your cooperative, etc. And you'll also want to be able to answer the how much. So that's where my brain goes all the time, because I'm a very frugal person and I don't have a lot of extra time. So how much time do you want from me and how much money do you want from me, essentially? But you know, there are tactful ways to communicate that, more tactful than me. The last 2 pieces that you'll want to touch on in this pitch, again, in the grocery store, you may not do this. We'll go to the next slide. Annette, is going to be around your team. It's a great lesson too that Local Investing YYC shared around building that credibility. And you can build a really strong team and you're able to show the profiles of the bios of those team members. It shows that you're actually capable of executing this very complex project in your community. But that will help build credibility and that trust that we talked about earlier. And then finally, that ask. So there's always got to be a call to action. There's always got to be something bridging you to the next conversation or the next tactic that you're going to embark on. And that might be whose help do you need and how do they participate? And, you know, a really clear way to move that forward. So whether it's, could I get your email today to send you more information tomorrow? Or whether it is, would you like to make the minimum investment amount of X dollars or what have you? So these are just kind of these pieces that you can then put together and have to deliver that pitch to your community. So we're taking all of those different levels of the pyramid, we're stacking them up. It does take some time, much more than the hour we have today. And maybe we will just go to the last slide, which is around, like, we'd love to book some more time with you. We'd love to dig in deeper with some of your groups. I think we were so worried about going over time with our various breakout sessions too, that now we've rushed through this with less discussion in order to make sure we covered everything. So I'd really like to be able now to turn it over like to some of those folks who have, you know, some of you here are at that sustainability stage. What other lessons can you share with us, knowing what we have to present today and what you know from your vast experience in this world? What other lessons and insights can you share with us? So I'm going to open the floor to everybody. We can stop sharing. We do have the Slack channel there. I'll just quickly mention that while it's on the screen, and we'll throw it in the chat. We have started a Slack channel where we can openly and quickly communicate with each other. Slack's just a great online conversation tool. So we have different topics in there around investment co-ops that we're chatting about, and we invite you to all join us online, because based on the folks I know here, we're in every corner of Alberta and BC and can't necessarily meet in person. So if you don't have time to book meetings with everyone, you can quickly ask them questions in the Slack channel. So we'll stop sharing, Annette, if you don't mind, and we'll turn it over to the group and ask if anyone would like to share some of their lessons learned or insights on how they've reached out to their communities.
Boy, we're a reticent bunch today.
Right? Please don't be shy. What questions come to mind?
Well, as I said in the chat, we're just getting started. So I was just very grateful for this opportunity to learn from everyone. So I'm just listening. I got lots of notes, and obviously the recording, and I'm sharing all the documents from the folder too. So it's, yeah, I don't have a lot to share there, unfortunately.
Thanks for sharing that, Mark. That's just good to know where you're at.
I'll just add, and this is as just kind of more of a comment, sorry. But I noticed there's lots that can be updated. I know these a lot of projects, it's, we formed and here's the investment and here's the success. Those are kind of the big milestones that you're going to hit. But there's so many other points that groups can connect on along the way. We had a great meeting. We had a great meeting in a local business. We had a great session with this group. We had a great meeting. We formed a committee. Where people are seeing that forward progress is supporting that credibility, and also maybe starting to plant a seed of, oh, I could get involved in that. I like participating in my community. Oh, I know that local business. I'm one of these people that could participate, rather than, oh, that's just for other people, or that's not for me. I could actually be involved. And sometimes it can take, a dozen points of contact. So a LinkedIn post, an email, I bumped into them in the grocery store. There's so many tools that you have, but because these projects are quite large, we're doing something really interesting. Getting people to invest into their community isn't yet a regular thing, but we are building that track record, and you're all involved in that. So you have lots of points of contact, lots of people, and it doesn't have to be, a grand slam every communication time. It can just be a single, if we're using the baseball analogies, or just, what are the ways to get some quick wins, quick connections of saying, oh, what are you working on? Oh, I'm part of this investment co-op. Oh, you want to learn more? Sure, great. Let's go for a coffee. I'll tell you all about it. Or often it's the other way. People are paying attention and saying, like, I've been following your LinkedIn, and there's you post a lot about this stuff. Like, I'd love to learn more. And then, so you're all active in this, and often people are picking up on it. So it isn't just, hey, time to invest in this idea, or come to the grand opening. You have lots of tools, but Zoe has a hand, and I'll stop rambling on.
Just bailing you out, Seth. No, I actually wanted to build upon where you're starting, the riffing culture. I also have found it really useful letting people see that they're part of something exciting and emerging. And so allowing people to place themselves with their money or their time in part of an expanding, exploding movement, for lack of a better word, right? Whether it's the co-op movement, whether it's the local investment movement, whether it's in position to, like, against seeing their money hemorrhage into communities or entities that they will never see grow or expand, but really like meeting the investor or the volunteer or the member where they're at, and kind of welcoming them into an enterprise and something that's growing in really exciting ways that are starting to make good things happen. So when you talk about value proposition and really articulating the value of the enterprise, I think it's also important to have your values front and center as well, which is part of as these investment vehicles are nested in the co-op sector. The co-op sector has codified values, so lean on those, right? And you can include those at different times, or focus in on one of the co-op values to different audiences to see what makes them feel part of something, and then bring them closer and closer to opening both their calendar and their wallets and their expertise into investing in local enterprises.
Yeah, I love that, Zoe. I really love that. Did someone else have their hand up there, or that Zoe's maybe still? Yeah, I just threw that in the chat. Like it's really like marketing principles that folks, and to what you're saying, Seth, folks have to hear about something and learn about something many, many times before they'll even consider taking part. So being consistent is key. Is there a cost for a follow-up session? No, Catherine, I am happy to to sit down with you, have a meeting, and walk through the workbook, and maybe create a good strategic kind of roadmap for you, I guess, the workbook is meant to be that roadmap, but we can help you dig deeply into that, because we knew we wouldn't have the time as we started to develop this workshop to really dig in deep. Any other comments, questions, insights?
If I may,
Please,
Bridget,
Zoe.
Chatty
Yeah.
Zoe. I think also just seeing the breadth of where people are coming from on this call today. I see someone starting a nonprofit. Maybe people don't even see themselves as, starting an investment co-op, right? I mean, I think it's important for us to understand what we are promoting and what we are trying to get people to jump onto. And so they're all different ways and vehicles to generate cash and supports for worthwhile causes, right? And so I think it's important for us not to get too stuck on, well, I'm a nonprofit just looking for fundraising. I can't sell investment shares, right? But I see as we're working in this kind of growing, exciting, emerging space, it's really good. And Bridget, I'm so happy you're available for follow-up chats, because I think it's really important that even if we don't see ourselves as starting an investment co-op, the way we promote our activities is kind of aligned with what you're proposing as a good way forward. So I thank you for that.
Thank you, Zoe. Yeah, I do also work in the social impact sector as a consultant for nonprofits. And so I have that lens as well. And I was just doing research on capital campaigns for nonprofits. And there are so many similarities in how capital campaign experts, who's a pretty specialized experts, deliver or plan and execute capital campaigns. So it'd be interesting to chat about that with the nonprofit folks even further. Yeah, you're welcome for letting you in. It's a pleasure to have you. Any other comments, insights?
Yeah, I think Bridget, your point there about grade 5 language, and that's not necessarily just in the pitch, right? It's from the overall perspective of, social investing, and because most people don't know, like the average person has no idea how to even participate in their communities, and they're in their communities all the time. And I think one of the jobs that I'm hoping to do from a Village Wellth standpoint is make this known, cross demographics, right? I mean, how do we tap into an audience? And we've been saying this so much just around general investing. Not everybody has their life savings to go buy a business, but people have, a few $1,000s to pour back into their communities that really, really need the help and support, and just showing them as an option. And I know we have, some nonprofit, but we also have co-op investments that are for profit, and it doesn't have to be a dirty word either. Right. So we're tapping certainly into our audience of Village Wellth over this next coming weeks. We've kind of produced 2 different blogs that we'll be kind of pushing out to our audience that introduces them to just the idea of this, and trying to use as basic language as possible is just going to be so important in just starting that conversation.
Yeah, totally agree. It's such a monstrous concept, investment co-ops. It really is, but it can be very relatable to anyone in our communities if communicated in a way that they can grasp, or begin to grasp. Anyone else have comments they'd like to share? That's why it's fun. Great challenge. Yeah, wonderful challenge and wonderful solution, even for entrepreneurs. I think that's what's been really enlightening for me. We were talking to investment co-op in Shaunavon, Saskatchewan, close to where I'm from actually. And they were offering microloans to the small businesses who might not otherwise be bankable, but might just need a new cappuccino machine or a new, whatever piece of manufacturing equipment. And so what an incredible opportunity for those entrepreneurs to keep their businesses growing and thriving. It's pretty cool. All right. Oh, sorry, Michelle, I didn't see your hand. I've got too many screens here. That's why I'm looking around like a.
Just popped up. It's okay. Yeah, I just wanted to riff off of what Josh was sharing about blogs coming out soon. I think those are great opportunities to read them, obviously, and then share them out amongst our channels and make the link with the work that we're doing. And so it's like a dual role, content and making it like relevant to the individual or like the group work. So
yeah, that's a really good point. Sharing it amongst everyone. That's that network effect will start to take hold, right? Wonderful. Well, I'm going to put our survey link in the chat again. It was Annette had put it there, but it probably got lost. So we'd love your feedback. We know that we tried to cover a whole lot in a short time here. And again, would really like the chance to sit down with your groups and help you develop these workbooks further.
Catherine had a question.
Oh, sorry.
Bridget.
Yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I guess one of the questions I had, and I think a resource that might be helpful, is this whole struggle between, is it not for profit or is it for investment? And it seems pretty early in the process, one has to make a decision around that. And I wonder if there could be some kind of a guideline around like the Securities Act implications, the tax implications, the funding ramifications of which way to go, just what factors one should consider.
Indeed. I can speak to that. Looking more as the on the co-op development side. So through this process, we are looking at some decision trees and checklists to be able to set this up from the outset and moving forward. You know, what's the best fit? I think in this presentation, just to kind of, if I can make a connection around that idea in the workbook of the mission and vision. And seeing that as really the initiating of you know what you're looking to accomplish through this group, and then what's the best legal structure to then fulfill that mission, and seeing that how that connects the for-profit versus not-for-profit, looking at the different revenue streams, whether that's coming from grants or charitable donations, things like that will definitely dictate it. I, as someone in the co-op space, I think, you know, definitely skew that way towards the co-op structure and that idea of having stakeholders to own and control whatever structure is being built. But again, those can be for-profit and not-for-profit. But it definitely aligns into this because it will also make an impact on how capital is raised, the relationship with the member investors, your reporting, your accounting, and the tax aspects there. So probably the basis for another webinar. And maybe on that note too, if people are interested in more sessions like this, we'd love to hear from you, either through the Slack channel or through an email. That would be great. But Catherine, as always, excellent questions, and really to consider what's going to advance this work and what infrastructure and structures need to be created to do that.
Yeah, thanks, Seth. That's exactly a decision tree, some guidance along that. And I haven't really gone through the workbook yet, but that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Great. I'm not sure actually if the link works now. Does it work now, Michelle? Okay, we'll figure that out. I'm not sure what's happening there. We will send out the survey link through a follow-up email with another link to the resources folder if you missed it, and the recording if you care to use that. So with just a minute left, I guess, great timing. We'll say thank you to everybody for joining us today. We appreciate your time and look forward to connecting with you, your groups individually to build out that workbook more if that's which way you choose to go. Any other closing remarks, Seth?
I think there's a question from Tyler.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I'm in a spot with sketchy reception, so apologies if I'm breaking up. But one question I had, and it's probably not for this session, or if it was covered, I apologize, was around the chicken and egg scenario that we find our operating investment co-op in, of raising more funds, but also having adequate deal flow. from the perspective of new money in wants to see what we're going to invest in, and attracting new deals, we need to have that cash in the kitty to attract those. So it's a little nuanced and probably a deeper conversation. I'm happy to share our experience, and if anyone else has had that situation arise, happy to glean feedback from them as well.
I'd love to hear other people's insight on that. Like activating more deal flow is something that Village Wellth as a partner in this, we've identified as an area we could potentially help with. We do, not to pitch our wares or anything, but we do have a targeted targeting service where we can help you identify opportunities in your community or whatever your geographical limits are more discreetly through if discretion is important, and just maybe from a different angle. But the double-sided, like the double side of that, I don't know, do others have comments they'd like to share? No. Any insights there, Seth? Like maybe from Local Investing YYC? I'm sure it's something they've dealt with. Yeah. Of the groups I know.
Yeah, I think it's like Tyler, as you mentioned, sort of the chicken and the egg challenge. I think through the work that we're doing and the feedback from groups that are raising capital is a lot around the process. And are there ways to engage members to fund part of this work, as well as looking at other strategies for acquisition or through the deal flow? It's definitely chicken and the egg, but it's also a bit of a flywheel. Once there's dollars invested into projects, if it's generating some revenue, as well as what's the exit of that capital, and that's definitely something to be created through a strategy and some of your financial modeling. But I think when we're looking at the member engagement and the investors, who are investors that would be interested in investing at the outset, part of the searching and due diligence process, and what are their needs? So again, thinking of what are those investor profiles of people in your community that might be willing to take on a little more risk or a longer term to go through the entire process. And then at that point, that the one that you have adequate time to review the deals that fit the criteria for your co-op, being able to build up probably a letter of interest and secure, through a contract, how to invest into those, and then how to invite the rest of the community to then buy shares in the co-op or into the business, those pieces that are there. So again, really thinking of like, who are the potential investors that could get into this project at the outset? And then who are maybe other community members that would be willing to invest later into the project, maybe in like a second round that way. So still, I'm covering it in a very general way, but it is, I think, a way through the member engagement that you might have some solutions that are there. But it is a common problem that we are looking to understand better and hopefully build some strategies around. But also feel free to reach out if you want to discuss this further, Tyler.
Will do. Thank you.
Great. Well, with that, we'll let everybody get back to their day. Looking forward to following up with you all after this and getting to know your groups more. So please feel free to reach out and have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks, everybody.
Bridget.
Thanks.
Thanks, Bridget.